The champagne glass trembled in my hand as my Aunt Linda's voice cut through the Easter brunch chatter like a knife. "Well, there's our little failure," she announced to the entire table at the Riverside Country Club, her perfectly manicured, finger pointing directly at me. "Still playing with computers while the rest of us have real careers." What she didn't know was that in exactly 37 minutes, my private jet would be landing at the nearby airstrip to take me to my own island. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Emma Richardson, and for the first 28 years of my life, I was the family disappointment. Growing up in the small town of Millbrook, Connecticut, I learned early that success was measured by how well you fit into everyone else's expectations. My younger sister Madison was the golden standard. Homecoming queen, sorority president, married her college sweetheart right after graduation, and now sells luxury homes to wealthy families moving to our picturesque New England town. She was everything our family valued: charming, social, conventional, and most importantly, easily understood. I, on the other hand, was the weird one. The girl who spent her weekends taking apart old computers instead of going to parties. The teenager who preferred coding to shopping, who built websites for local businesses instead of dating the quarterback. While Madison collected trophies for her cheerleading achievements, I collected programming languages: Python, Java, C++, JavaScript. While she posed for homecoming photos, I was hunched over my laptop in the basement, lost in lines of code that made perfect sense to me, but might as well have been hieroglyphics to everyone else. Our parents, David and Carol Richardson, weren't cruel people. They loved me in their own way, but they simply didn't understand me. Dad ran a successful insurance agency downtown, the kind of traditional business that had been serving the same families for 3 generations. Mom worked part-time at the local bank and spent the rest of her energy organizing charity events and garden club meetings. They lived in a world where success meant steady jobs, nice houses, and fitting into the community fabric. Madison embodied everything they hoped for in a daughter. I was the puzzle piece that didn't quite fit the picture they had in mind for their family. The comparisons started early and never stopped. At family dinners, the conversation always flowed toward Madison's achievements: her latest real estate sale, her husband's promotion at the law firm, their beautiful colonial house with the perfectly landscaped yard. When the attention occasionally turned to me, the questions were always tinged with concern rather than pride. "Emma's still doing her computer thing," Mom would say with a forced smile, as if my career was a phase I hadn't grown out of yet. "She's very smart, but we worry she spends too much time alone." The person who worried about me most was Aunt Linda, Mom's younger sister who had appointed herself the family's unofficial success monitor. Linda had married well. Her husband Mark owned a chain of sporting goods stores across Connecticut, and she never let anyone forget it. She lived in a mansion in the affluent part of town, drove a Mercedes, and treated every family gathering like a competition where she was both judge and reigning champion. Linda had a daughter, my cousin Sophia, who was Madison's age and followed a similar path of conventional achievement. Sophia was now a marketing manager at a pharmaceutical company, engaged to a doctor, and planning a wedding that Linda described as the social event of the season. In Linda's eyes, I was the family failure, the odd one out who couldn't manage to follow the prescribed path to respectability. She never missed an opportunity to point out my shortcomings, usually disguised as concern. "Emma, honey, when are you going to find a nice man and settle down? You can't play with computers forever." Or, "I just worry that you're wasting all that education on something so uncertain. Technology changes so fast. What happens when your skills become obsolete?" The only person who ever saw potential in me was Uncle George, Dad's older brother, who owned a small electronics repair shop on Main Street. George had always been the family rebel. He'd dropped out of college to start his business, much to everyone's horror, and had spent decades fixing televisions, radios, and later computers for the townspeople. While everyone else saw his shop as evidence of unfulfilled potential, I saw it as a place of magic where broken things came back to life. Uncle George was the one who gave me my first computer when I was 12, an ancient desktop that he'd rescued from someone's garage sale. "Most people see junk," he told me as we carried it down to our basement, "but I see possibilities. I think you do too." He was right. Within a month, I had that computer running better than new. Within a year, I was building websites for Uncle George's customers. By high school, I was earning more money from my bedroom computer than Madison made from her part-time job at the local boutique. But none of that mattered to the rest of the family. When I graduated valedictorian from Millbrook High, the celebration was muted. When Madison graduated third in her class 2 years later, there was a party that lasted until midnight. When I got accepted to MIT with a full scholarship for computer science, the response was polite congratulations, followed by concerns about whether I'd be able to make friends in such a competitive environment. When Madison got accepted to the State University to study communications, it was treated as a victory for the whole family. College was my escape. At MIT, I wasn't the weird computer girl. I was surrounded by people who spoke my language, who understood the beauty of elegant code and the thrill of solving complex problems. I thrived in an environment where intelligence was valued over popularity, where innovation mattered more than conformity. For 4 years, I lived in a world where I finally belonged. My professors saw something in me that my family never had. Dr. Patricia Chen, who taught my advanced algorithms course, became my mentor and later my research advisor. "You have an unusual gift, Emma," she told me during my junior year. "You don't just understand code. You understand systems. You see patterns that others miss. That's not something you can teach." Under her guidance, I spent my senior year developing what would become the foundation of my future empire, a revolutionary data analysis platform that could identify market trends and consumer behavior patterns with unprecedented accuracy. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The technology I created was groundbreaking. While other data analysis tools focused on historical patterns, my system could predict future trends by analyzing hundreds of variables in real time. It could tell a retailer which products would be in demand 3 months before their competitors even knew those products existed. It could predict stock market movements, consumer preferences, even social media trends with remarkable accuracy. I graduated summa cum laude with a degree in computer science and a minor in business administration. My thesis on predictive analytics was published in 3 academic journals and caught the attention of several tech companies who offered me lucrative positions. But I had bigger dreams. I wanted to build something of my own, something that would change how businesses understood their customers and markets. The problem was, I needed capital to turn my college project into a real company. My parents, who had spent Madison's college years proudly writing tuition checks and bragging about her sorority activities, seemed bewildered by my ambitions. When I explained my business plan over dinner during my graduation visit, Dad's response was typical. "That sounds very complicated, Emma. Wouldn't it be easier to just get a regular job at one of those computer companies? At least then you'd have benefits and a steady paycheck." Mom nodded in agreement. "We just want you to be secure, honey. Starting a business is so risky. Look at your Uncle George. He's been struggling with that repair shop for 20 years. The irony wasn't lost on me. Uncle George, the family's cautionary tale about the dangers of entrepreneurship, was actually one of the most content people I knew. He loved his work, had a loyal customer base, and had been quietly successful for decades. But because his success didn't look like what the family expected, it was dismissed as failure. The final blow came when I asked for a loan to help start my company. I had a solid business plan, letters of recommendation from my professors, and preliminary interest from several potential clients. I needed $50,000 to cover initial expenses, server costs, software licenses, and basic operating expenses for the first year. I had already secured a small business loan for most of my startup costs, but I needed family help to bridge the gap. The family meeting was held in my parents' formal dining room, the same room where we'd celebrated Madison's engagement the year before. Dad sat at the head of the table with a stack of financial documents, Mom beside him looking concerned, and Aunt Linda across from me wearing an expression that clearly conveyed her opinion of my frivolous request. Madison wasn't there. She was showing houses to clients, but her absence felt like another reminder of whose priorities mattered in our family. $50,000 is a lot of money, Emma, Dad began, his voice taking on the same tone he used with insurance clients who were filing questionable claims. We're not saying no, but we need to understand what we're investing in. He emphasized the word investing, as if it were a foreign concept he was trying to pronounce correctly. I spent the next hour explaining my business model, showing them projections, sharing testimonials from potential clients who had tested early versions of my software. I explained how data analytics was revolutionizing every industry, how my platform could help businesses make better decisions and increase their profits. I might as well have been speaking ancient Greek. Aunt Linda was the first to voice what everyone was thinking. Emma, sweetheart, this all sounds very technical and impressive, but what happens if it doesn't work? $50,000 could pay for a wedding or a down payment on a nice house, or something concrete that will actually benefit the family. This computer thing you're describing, how do we even know there's a market for it? The questions that followed revealed how little they understood about my field or my capabilities. They wanted to know if I had considered more practical alternatives, whether I had looked into getting a real job with the established company, why I couldn't just work on my computer projects as a hobby while pursuing a more traditional career. Each question felt like another brick in a wall being built between me and the people who were supposed to support me unconditionally. The meeting ended with Dad promising to think about it and get back to me within a week. I knew what that meant. 3 days later, he called to tell me that while they believed in me, they couldn't justify the financial risk. The money they had set aside for my future would be better used for something more stable, perhaps helping me buy a house once I found a steady job, or contributing to a wedding fund for when I eventually settled down. That same week, Madison announced that she and her husband were looking at vacation homes in the Hamptons, and my parents were thrilled to help with the down payment. The contrast was so stark it was almost comical. Madison's desire for a summer house was seen as a smart investment and a sign of her success. My business plan was treated like an expensive hobby that they needed to discourage before it got out of hand. Uncle George was the only one who understood my disappointment. When I stopped by his shop to tell him about the family's decision, he listened quietly while I tried to keep my voice steady. "They're scared, Emma," he said finally, looking up from the computer he was repairing. "People fear what they don't understand, and they really don't understand what you do. But that doesn't mean you're wrong. It just means you have to find another way." He was right, of course. I had to find another way. What I didn't know then was that the rejection from my family would turn out to be the best thing that ever happened to me. It forced me to become completely self-reliant, to build something that was entirely mine, and to prove that their lack of faith was their loss, not my limitation. That night, sitting in my childhood bedroom surrounded by participation trophies, from academic competitions and science fairs that my family had attended out of obligation rather than pride, I made a decision that would change the trajectory of my entire life. I was going to build my company without their help, without their approval, and without their understanding. I was going to succeed on terms that were entirely my own, and someday, they would understand exactly what they had dismissed. The rejection from my family lit a fire inside me that I hadn't known existed. Within a week of their decision, I had packed everything I owned into my Honda Civic and driven 12 hours straight to Austin, Texas. I had chosen Austin deliberately. It was far enough from Connecticut to feel like a completely fresh start, but close enough to major tech hubs that I could build the connections I needed. More importantly, it was a city that celebrated innovation and risk-taking, the exact opposite of the small-town mentality I was leaving behind. My first apartment was a studio in East Austin that was charitable to call modest. The carpet was stained, the air conditioning barely worked, and the kitchen was so small I could touch both walls with my arms outstretched. But it was mine, and more importantly, it was affordable. I had exactly $8,000 in savings from various programming jobs I'd done throughout college, and I knew every penny would count in the coming months. The first few weeks were brutal. I spent my days applying for freelance programming contracts and my nights working on refining, my data analytics platform. I lived on ramen noodles and peanut butter sandwiches. Not because I was being nostalgic about college life, but because I literally couldn't afford anything else. My furniture consisted of a used mattress on the floor, a folding table that served as both dining surface and desk, and a single plastic chair I'd found at a thrift store. But I was happier than I'd been in years. For the first time in my life, I was completely in control of my own destiny. Every decision I made was mine alone. Every success would be earned through my own efforts. And every failure would teach me something valuable rather than confirm someone else's low expectations. My breakthrough came 3 months after arriving in Austin. I had been working on a freelance project for a small marketing firm, helping them analyze their client data to improve campaign effectiveness. The results were so impressive that the firm's owner, Marcus Webb, asked to meet with me in person. Marcus was a sharp entrepreneur in his 40s who had built his agency from nothing into one of Austin's most respected marketing companies. "Emma, what you've done with our data is remarkable," he said as we sat in his sleek downtown office overlooking Lady Bird Lake. "We've been able to predict customer behavior with accuracy we've never seen before. Our clients are getting results that are making them look like marketing geniuses." He leaned forward, his expression serious. "I need to understand something. Is this just clever analysis, or do you have some kind of proprietary system?" I took a deep breath. This was the moment I had been preparing for, the opportunity to pitch my technology to someone who might actually understand its value. I've developed a predictive analytics platform that processes multiple data streams simultaneously to identify patterns that traditional analysis misses. It's not just about looking at what happened. It's about understanding why it happened and what's likely to happen next. Marcus listened intently as I explained the technical aspects of my system, asking intelligent questions that showed he grasped both the complexity and the potential of what I had built. Unlike the blank stares I had received from my family, Marcus's eyes lit up with understanding and excitement. "Emma, do you realize what you've created here? This isn't just a tool. This is a competitive advantage that could revolutionize how businesses make decisions. Have you considered turning this into a standalone company?" When I told him about my plans and my funding challenges, Marcus didn't hesitate. "I want to invest. Not just money. I want to be your first partner. I'll provide the initial capital you need, and I'll help you navigate the business side while you focus on the technology." Within 6 months, Analytica Core was officially incorporated with Marcus as my business partner and first investor. He had provided the $50,000 my family had refused to risk, plus an additional $75,000 for rapid expansion. More importantly, he brought credibility and business connections that would have taken me years to develop on my own. Our first office was a modest space in a converted warehouse in East Austin, but it felt like a palace compared to my apartment. We hired our first 2 employees, a brilliant data scientist named Dr. Raj Patel, who had recently completed his PhD at UT Austin, and a software engineer named Claire Murphy, who had left a senior position at Dell to join our startup. Both of them believed in the vision of Analytica Core and were willing to take equity over high salaries to be part of something revolutionary. The early days were a whirlwind of 18-hour workdays, countless cups of coffee, and the exhilarating feeling of building something from scratch. We were scrappy and hungry, working with the intensity that only comes from knowing you're creating something that could change everything. Our first major client was a regional retail chain that was struggling to compete with larger national brands. Using our platform, we helped them optimize their inventory, improve their marketing targeting, and predict seasonal trends with unprecedented accuracy. Their sales increased by 37% in the first quarter after implementation. Word spread quickly in Austin's tight-knit business community. Within a year, we had contracts with 12 companies ranging from tech startups to established manufacturing firms. Our platform was helping a restaurant chain optimize their menu offerings, enabling a real estate company to predict market trends, and allowing a logistics firm to streamline their operations with remarkable efficiency. The success was intoxicating, but it also meant that I had virtually no time for anything outside of work. I missed family gatherings, declined invitations from the few friends I'd made in Austin, and went months without taking a single day off. My entire existence revolved around making Analytica Core successful, not just because I believed in the technology, but because I needed to prove that my family's lack of faith had been their mistake, not my overconfidence. During this period, my contact with my family was minimal and superficial. I would receive occasional texts from Mom asking how I was doing, and I would respond with brief updates that everything was going well. I didn't mention the long hours, the financial stress of the early months, or the magnitude of what we were building. Part of me wanted to keep my success private until it was so undeniable that they would have to acknowledge it. Another part of me was protecting myself from the possibility that they might find new ways to diminish what I was accomplishing. Madison and I exchanged pleasantries on birthdays and holidays, but our conversations never went deeper than surface level. Updates about weather and work. She would tell me about her latest real estate sales or her husband's cases at the law firm, and I would make generic comments about being busy with my company. Neither of us made any effort to bridge the growing distance between our lives. The only family member I maintained a real relationship with was Uncle George. He would call every few weeks to check on me, and unlike everyone else, he asked specific questions about the technical challenges I was facing and celebrated the small victories that marked our progress. When I told him about landing our first major contract, he was genuinely excited. "I knew you had it in you, Emma. I remember when you fixed that old computer I gave you. You didn't just make it work, you made it better than it had ever been. That's what you do." By the end of our second year, Analytica Core had grown to 15 employees and had contracts with over 40 companies across Texas and surrounding states. We had moved to a larger office in downtown Austin, complete with a conference room that overlooked the Colorado River and individual offices for our senior staff. Our annual revenue had reached $2 million, and we were projected to double that the following year. The transformation in my personal life was just as dramatic as the business success. I had traded my studio apartment for a modern loft in a converted warehouse, complete with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the Austin skyline. I drove a BMW instead of my old Honda, wore designer clothes to client meetings, and had developed the confidence that comes from knowing you're exceptionally good at what you do. But the real validation came from the respect I earned within Austin's tech community. I was invited to speak at conferences, quoted in industry publications, and sought out by other entrepreneurs who wanted advice on building data-driven companies. The same analytical mind that had made me seem weird and antisocial in my small Connecticut hometown was now seen as a valuable asset by some of the most successful people in Texas. The irony wasn't lost on me. The skills that my family had dismissed as playing with computers were now generating more revenue than Madison's real estate career and Dad's insurance agency combined. The unconventional path they had worried about was proving more lucrative and fulfilling than the traditional routes they had encouraged me to pursue. However, success also brought new challenges that I hadn't anticipated. As Analytica Core grew, I found myself spending less time on the technical work I loved and more time on management responsibilities that felt foreign and exhausting. I had to learn how to hire and fire employees, negotiate contracts with major corporations, and present our company's vision to potential investors who spoke a completely different language than the engineers and data scientists I was comfortable working with. The pressure was immense. Every decision I made affected not just my own future, but the livelihoods of our employees and the expectations of our clients. There were nights when I lay awake wondering if I was in over my head, if I had pushed too hard too fast, if the next day would bring news that would destroy everything we had built. Marcus was invaluable during this period, serving as both mentor and buffer between me and the business pressures that threatened to overwhelm me. "Emma, you're trying to do everything yourself," he told me during one particularly stressful week when we were negotiating our largest contract to date. "You built an incredible technology, but now you need to trust other people to help you. Scale it." The best CEOs aren't the ones who can do every job in the company. They're the ones who can find the right people to do those jobs better than they could themselves. His advice led to one of the most important decisions in Analytica Core's history. We hired Sarah Chen, a former executive from Oracle, as our chief operating officer. Sarah brought the operational expertise and corporate experience that neither Marcus nor I possessed. She systematized our processes, implemented scalable management structures, and freed me to focus on product development and strategic vision, while she handled the day-to-day operations that had been consuming my time and energy. With Sarah managing operations and Marcus handling business development, I was able to return to what I did best, pushing the boundaries of what our technology could accomplish. I spent months developing new features that would make our platform not just more powerful, but more accessible to companies that didn't have dedicated data science teams. The breakthrough came when we created an intuitive interface that allowed business managers to run complex analyses without needing to understand the underlying algorithms. This innovation expanded our potential market exponentially. Instead of selling only to companies with sophisticated analytics teams, we could now serve small and medium-sized businesses that had never been able to afford enterprise-level data analysis. Our client base exploded from 40 companies to over 200 within 6 months of launching the new interface. The growth was so rapid that we had to move offices again, this time to a full floor of a downtown high-rise with space for 50 employees. We hired aggressively, bringing in talent from major tech companies who were attracted by our innovative technology and rapid growth trajectory. The company culture we developed was everything I had dreamed of: collaborative, intellectually, challenging, and focused on solving complex problems that made a real difference for our clients. But even as Analytica Core's success exceeded my wildest expectations, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. I had achieved financial independence, professional recognition, and the satisfaction of building something important from scratch. I had proven that my family's doubts were unfounded and that the path they had discouraged was actually the one that led to extraordinary success. Yet I felt increasingly isolated from the people who should have been celebrating these achievements with me. My family's continued indifference to my success was becoming harder to ignore. When I had casually mentioned during a brief phone call with Mom that my company had reached $10 million in annual revenue, her response had been to change the subject to Madison's latest real estate award. When I told Dad that Analytica Core had been featured on the cover of Austin Business Journal, he had congratulated me politely before launching into a detailed account of his golf game from the previous weekend. The disconnect was painful in ways I hadn't expected. I had thought that achieving undeniable success would automatically earn their respect and interest, but instead, it seemed to create an even larger gulf between us. My accomplishments were so far outside their frame of reference that they couldn't relate to them at all, while their continued focus on conventional markers of success felt increasingly irrelevant to the life I was building. This emotional distance came to a head during a phone call with Aunt Linda that left me questioning whether maintaining family relationships was worth the constant frustration. She had called ostensibly to catch up, but the conversation quickly revealed her real agenda. "Emma, your mother tells me you're still doing well with your computer business down in Texas," she began, her tone carrying the same condescending note I remembered from childhood family gatherings. "That's wonderful, dear. But I hope you're not so focused on work that you're forgetting about the important things in life. Madison just bought the most beautiful house. You should see the kitchen renovation she's planning. And Sophia is getting married next spring. We're all so excited about the wedding." The subtext was clear. While I was playing with computers, the important women in our family were achieving the milestones that really mattered: marriage, homes, the traditional markers of female success that Linda understood and valued. My professional achievements, no matter how impressive, were secondary to the biological and social expectations that I was failing to meet. "Actually, Aunt Linda, my company just secured a contract with Fortune 500 clients, and we're expanding into international markets next year," I responded, trying to keep my voice level. "We're projected to reach $50 million in revenue within the next 18 months. There was a pause before she responded, and I could practically hear her mental recalibration as she tried to process numbers that were beyond anything anyone in our family had ever dealt with. "Well, that's very impressive, Emma, but money isn't everything. You can't hug a bank account, and you can't take your business to family dinner on Thanksgiving. I just worry that you're missing out on the things that will really make you happy in the long run." That conversation crystallized something I had been trying to avoid acknowledging. My family's inability to appreciate my success wasn't just about their limited understanding of technology or business. It was about fundamentally different values and definitions of what constituted a meaningful life. They weren't going to suddenly develop the capacity to celebrate achievements they couldn't relate to, and I wasn't going to abandon the path that had brought me fulfillment and success just to earn their approval. The realization was both liberating and heartbreaking. I was free to pursue my own vision of success without constantly measuring it against their expectations, but I was also accepting that the family relationships I had hoped to repair through achievement might never be what I wanted them to be. This internal conflict was weighing heavily on my mind when I received an invitation that would change everything. Marcus had forwarded me an email from the Austin Chamber of Commerce announcing their annual Entrepreneur of the Year awards. Analytica Core had been nominated in the Technology Innovation category, and the ceremony would be attended by some of the most influential business leaders in Texas. "Emma, this is huge," Marcus told me when we discussed the nomination over lunch. "Winning this award would put Analytica Core on the map nationally. We're talking about recognition that could open doors to clients and investors we've never had access to before." The award ceremony was scheduled for the second week of March, just a few days before Easter Sunday. The Entrepreneur of the Year ceremony exceeded every expectation I had for what recognition could feel like. The ballroom at the Four Seasons was filled with Austin's most successful business leaders, venture capitalists, and tech innovators. When they announced Analytica Core as the winner in the Technology Innovation category, the applause felt like validation for every sleepless night, every rejected pitch, and every moment of doubt I had experienced over the past 4 years. Standing on that stage, holding the crystal award that reflected the ballroom's chandelier lights, I felt a profound sense of completion. The girl who had been dismissed as the family computer nerd was now being recognized alongside entrepreneurs who had built companies worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The speech I gave that night wasn't about revenge or proving anyone wrong. It was about the power of believing in yourself when nobody else will. 4 years ago, I moved to Austin with $8,000 and a belief that data could change how businesses make decisions, I told the audience of nearly 500 people. Tonight, Analytica Core serves over 300 clients across North America, employs 67 people, and generates annual revenue that exceeds $50 million. But the real success isn't measured in numbers. It's measured in the problems we've solved and the innovations we've enabled for companies that trusted us with their future. The response was overwhelming. Before I left the ceremony, I had business cards from 12 potential clients, 3 acquisition offers from larger tech companies, and an invitation to speak at the South by Southwest conference the following year. More importantly, I had the kind of industry recognition that would open doors I hadn't even known existed. The local media coverage was extensive. The Austin Business Journal ran a feature story about my journey from small-town Connecticut to tech entrepreneur, complete with photos of our downtown office and interviews with our key clients. The Austin Chronicle included Analytica Core in their annual Companies to Watch list, and I was interviewed on 2 local business radio shows about the future of data analytics. For the first time since starting the company, I felt comfortable sharing my success with my family. I called Mom the morning after the ceremony, expecting that even she would be impressed by the level of recognition I had received. The conversation started well enough. She congratulated me on the award and seemed genuinely interested when I described the ceremony and the media attention that had followed. "That all sounds wonderful, Emma," she said, her voice warm with what seemed like genuine pride. "Your father and I are so happy that your business is doing well. We always knew you were smart, and it's nice to see that paying off for you." For a moment, I thought perhaps we had finally reached a breakthrough, that my success had become significant enough for them to understand and appreciate. Then she continued, "Madison has some exciting news too. She's been selected as the top realtor in her office for the 3rd year in a row, and she and David are thinking about buying a bigger house. They're looking at places in that new development near the country club. And guess what? Linda and Mark are helping them with the down payment as an early inheritance gift. Isn't that generous?" The casual transition from my national business recognition to Madison's local real estate success felt like a familiar slap. Even an award that had been covered by multiple news outlets and celebrated by Austin's business community was treated as equivalent to Madison's office recognition. Worse, the detail about Aunt Linda and Uncle Mark providing financial support for Madison's house purchase was a pointed reminder of the assistance that had been denied to me when I needed it most. I ended the call politely, but the conversation left me with a familiar mixture of frustration and resignation. My family's ability to minimize my achievements had apparently evolved along with my success. When I was struggling to start my company, they dismissed my ambitions as unrealistic. Now that those ambitions had been realized beyond anything I had originally envisioned, they treated the results as merely another form of employment, no more impressive than any other job. The contrast with how my professional community viewed my success was stark. Within days of winning the award, I received calls from headhunters representing major tech companies who were interested in recruiting me for executive positions. 3 different venture capital firms reached out about potential investments in Analytica Core's expansion plans. 2 business schools invited me to speak at their entrepreneurship programs about building technology companies from scratch. Marcus was ecstatic about the opportunities that were opening up for us. "Emma, this award has put us in a completely different league," he told me during our weekly strategy meeting. "We're getting inquiries from Fortune 100 companies that wouldn't have returned our calls 6 months ago. I think it's time to seriously consider our next phase of growth." That next phase turned out to be more ambitious than either of us had initially imagined. Sarah Chen had been quietly developing an expansion strategy that would position Analytica Core as a major player in the international data analytics market. Her plan involved opening offices in New York, London, and Singapore within 18 months, along with developing industry-specific versions of our platform for healthcare, finance, and manufacturing sectors. The scope of Sarah's vision was breathtaking, but it also required a level of capital investment that would fundamentally change the nature of our company. We would need to raise at least $25 million in Series A funding, which meant bringing in institutional investors who would expect significant returns and would likely push for an eventual acquisition or public offering. The decision to pursue aggressive expansion wasn't one I made lightly. Analytica Core had been profitable and growing steadily without external investment beyond Marcus's initial contribution. We could have continued on that path, building a successful, regional company that provided comfortable incomes for all of us while maintaining complete control over our direction and culture. But the Entrepreneur Award had shown me something I hadn't fully understood before. The potential scale of what we had built was far beyond what I had originally envisioned. Our technology wasn't just valuable to the mid-sized companies we had been serving. It could revolutionize how major corporations approach decision-making across entire industries. The due diligence process with potential investors was intense and exhausting. Over the course of 3 months, I presented our business model to more than 20 different venture capital firms, private equity groups, and strategic investors. Each presentation required me to articulate not just what Analytica Core had accomplished, but what we could become with the right capital and strategic support. The process was also educational in ways I hadn't expected. Several of the most sophisticated investors we met with had done extensive research on our company and our market position. They understood aspects of our competitive advantages that I hadn't fully appreciated, and they saw opportunities for expansion that hadn't occurred to me. David Kim, a partner at one of Silicon Valley's most prestigious venture capital firms, put it in perspective during our final meeting. "Emma, what you've built isn't just a successful software company. It's a platform that could become the infrastructure layer for how businesses understand their customers and markets. You're not competing with other analytics companies. You're creating a new category." His firm, Meridian Ventures, led our Series A round with a $28 million investment that valued Analytica Core at over $100 million. The funding announcement made national business news, with coverage in TechCrunch, Forbes, and the Wall Street Journal. Suddenly, I wasn't just a successful regional entrepreneur. I was being described as one of the most promising tech CEOs in the country. The transformation that followed was swift and dramatic. We opened our New York office in a glass tower in Manhattan's financial district, hired a team of senior executives from companies like McKinsey and Deloitte, and began working with clients, whose names I had only seen in business school case studies. Our London office followed 6 months later, housed in a converted Victorian building in Shoreditch that became our European headquarters. Managing a company with offices on 3 continents required skills I had never developed and challenges I had never imagined. I found myself flying to New York twice a month, London quarterly, and Singapore for our Asian expansion planning. The work was exhilarating but exhausting, and it meant that my already limited personal life became virtually non-existent. The financial rewards were extraordinary. My equity stake in Analytica Core, which had been worth perhaps $50,000 when we started, was now valued at over $30 million on paper. More importantly, the company was generating enough cash flow to support a lifestyle I had never imagined possible. I bought a house in Austin's most exclusive neighborhood, complete with a home office that overlooked Lady Bird Lake and a wine cellar that I stocked with bottles that cost more than my first month's rent. But the real luxury was independence. For the first time in my life, I had the financial freedom to make decisions based purely on what I wanted to do, rather than what I could afford to do. When Uncle George mentioned that his electronics repair shop needed a new diagnostic system, I had a custom solution developed for him at no charge. When I read about a scholarship program for underprivileged students interested in computer science, I made a donation that fully funded 5 scholarships for 4 years each. The irony of my situation wasn't lost on me. I had achieved a level of success that exceeded anything anyone in my family had ever imagined possible. Yet I had virtually no personal relationships outside of my professional network. My romantic life was non-existent. I had gone on perhaps 6 dates in the 4 years since moving to Austin, and none had progressed beyond casual dinners because I was always traveling or working on urgent company matters. My friendships were largely limited to my business partners and a few other entrepreneurs I had met through industry events. While these relationships were meaningful and supportive, they were also tied to my professional identity in ways that sometimes felt limiting. I was Emma Richardson, the CEO of Analytica Core, in every context of my life except when I was alone in my house, looking out at the Austin skyline and wondering whether the price of my success had been worth paying. These philosophical questions became more pressing as the company's growth accelerated beyond even our optimistic projections. By early 2024, Analytica Core was serving over 800 clients in 15 countries, employed nearly 200 people, and was generating annual revenue approaching $100 million. Industry analysts were predicting that we would be acquired by one of the major tech giants within 2 years, likely for a valuation exceeding $1 billion. The acquisition speculation wasn't just media speculation. We were receiving serious inquiries from companies like Microsoft, Google, and Amazon about potential strategic partnerships or outright purchases. David Kim from Meridian Ventures was encouraging us to consider these opportunities, pointing out that a successful exit would provide financial security that would last several lifetimes and free me to pursue whatever interested me next. The decision about whether to sell the company was complicated by factors beyond just financial considerations. Analytica Core had become more than a business to me. It was proof of my capacity to build something significant, evidence that the skills and vision my family had dismissed were actually valuable enough to create substantial wealth and employment for hundreds of people. Selling the company would vindicate every decision I had made since leaving Connecticut, but it would also mean giving up control of something I had built from nothing. The potential buyers were all companies I respected, and they had committed to maintaining our culture and continuing to invest in our technology development. But they were also bureaucratic organizations where innovation moved slowly and individual vision could be diluted by committee decision-making. The internal debate about our future was still ongoing when I received a phone call that would force me to confront the family relationships I had been avoiding for years. It was early March, just days after we had announced our latest round of international expansion, when Mom called with what she described as an urgent family matter. "Emma, I need to ask you a favor," she began, her voice carrying an unusual note of anxiety. "Linda is planning the family Easter brunch at the country club this year, and she specifically asked me to make sure you'll be there. Apparently, she has some important family announcements to make, and she wants everyone present." The request was surprising for several reasons. I hadn't attended a family gathering in over 3 years, and Aunt Linda had never shown particular interest in my presence at family events. In fact, based on our last conversation, I would have expected her to be more comfortable with my absence than my attendance. "Mom, you know I don't usually make it back for holidays. I've got client meetings scheduled," and I started to offer my standard excuse, but she interrupted me with unusual firmness. "Emma, this is important. Linda specifically mentioned that she thinks it's time for the family to acknowledge how well everyone is doing, and she wants to celebrate all of our successes together. She mentioned your business specifically and said she's proud of what you've accomplished." The change in Aunt Linda's attitude was so dramatic that I was immediately suspicious. Linda had spent years treating my career as an interesting hobby that would eventually give way to more serious adult responsibilities. The idea that she was suddenly ready to celebrate my professional accomplishments seemed inconsistent with everything I knew about her priorities and values. But there was something in Mom's voice that suggested this gathering was more significant than a typical family holiday. When I pressed her for details about Linda's important announcements, she was evasive in a way that made me think she was being deliberately vague rather than genuinely uninformed. "Just promise me you'll try to make it, Emma. I know things have been distant between you and the family lately, but maybe this is an opportunity to reconnect. Linda really does seem interested in hearing about your company, and Madison would love to catch up with you." Against my better judgment, I found myself agreeing to attend. Perhaps it was curiosity about what had motivated Linda's apparent change of heart. Or maybe it was a lingering hope that my family was finally ready to acknowledge my success on its own terms. Whatever the reason, I cleared my schedule for Easter weekend and booked a flight back to Connecticut for the first time in over 2 years. The decision to attend the Easter brunch would prove to be one of the most important choices I had ever made, though not for any of the reasons I had anticipated. The flight back to Connecticut felt surreal after nearly 3 years away. As the plane descended toward Bradley International Airport, I could see the familiar landscape of my childhood: the rolling hills dotted with colonial houses, the winding Connecticut River, and the small towns that had once felt like the entire world but now seemed impossibly contained and provincial. I had arranged to stay at the Marriott downtown rather than with my parents, partly for practical reasons, but mostly because I wasn't sure I was ready for the intensity of being back in my childhood home. The hotel felt like neutral territory where I could maintain some emotional distance from whatever family dynamics were waiting for me. The first shock came when I called Mom to confirm the details for Sunday's brunch. "Oh, Emma, I'm so glad you're here," she said, her voice bright with an enthusiasm I hadn't heard in years. "Linda has been talking about this brunch for weeks. She's invited everyone, all the aunts and uncles, the cousins, even some family friends. She says it's going to be a proper celebration of how successful our family has become." The guest list was much larger than I had expected. What I had imagined as a typical family gathering was apparently being orchestrated as a major social event. Linda had reserved the main dining room at the Riverside Country Club, the same venue where Madison had held her engagement party and where our family had celebrated various milestones over the years. "She's planned quite a production," Mom continued. "Professional flowers, a special menu, even a photographer to capture the family together. Linda says she wants to commemorate this moment because everyone is doing so well in their careers and personal lives." The elaborate nature of the event made me even more suspicious about Linda's motives. In my experience, Linda didn't invest significant time and money in events unless she had a specific agenda that would somehow benefit her own social standing or family prestige. The idea that she was suddenly motivated by genuine pride in our collective success seemed inconsistent with her historical behavior patterns. I spent Saturday afternoon walking around downtown Millbrook, revisiting places that had been significant during my childhood and adolescence. The town hadn't changed much. The same shops lined Main Street, the same families seemed to be running the local businesses, and the same sense of insular comfort pervaded everything. But my perspective on it all had shifted dramatically. The electronic repair shop where Uncle George had first encouraged my interest in computers was still there, though it looked smaller and more dated than I remembered. When I stopped by to say hello, George was genuinely thrilled to see me. He had been following my success through occasional internet searches and had even read some of the recent articles about Analytica Core's expansion. "Emma, I can't believe what you've built," he said as we sat in his cluttered back office surrounded by disassembled electronics and outdated computer components. "When I gave you that old desktop computer, I hoped you'd learn something useful. I never imagined you'd create a company that employs hundreds of people and works with clients all over the world." His pride was uncomplicated and genuine, without any of the qualifications or diminishments that characterized my interactions with other family members. "You know, I've been thinking about retiring soon," he continued. "This shop has been my life for 30 years, but I'm ready for something different. Maybe I'll finally have time to learn about all these new technologies you've been developing." That evening, I had dinner with Madison and her husband David at their new house in the affluent Hillcrest neighborhood. The house was impressive, a sprawling colonial with perfectly manicured landscaping and an interior that looked like it had been lifted from a home design magazine. Madison had clearly achieved the traditional markers of success that our family valued: a beautiful home, a stable marriage, and a thriving career in real estate. Over dinner, Madison made genuine efforts to understand what I had been building in Austin. She asked thoughtful questions about how my technology worked, what kinds of problems it solved for clients, and what it was like managing a company with offices in multiple countries. Her interest seemed authentic, not performative, and for the first time in years I felt like we were having a real conversation rather than exchanging polite pleasantries. "Emma, I have to admit something," she said as we sat on her back patio with glasses of wine. "I've been following your company's progress online, and I'm honestly amazed by what you've accomplished. When we were kids, I knew you were smart, but I didn't understand that what you were doing with computers was actually building skills that would become so valuable." Her acknowledgement meant more to me than I had expected. Madison had always been the family success story, the one whose achievements were celebrated and whose path was held up as the model for how life should unfold. Having her recognize and validate my different but equally successful trajectory felt like a form of reconciliation that I hadn't realized I needed. "The thing that confuses me," she continued, "is why Mom and Dad don't seem to understand how impressive your success really is. I mean, your company is worth more than everything our entire extended family has ever earned combined, and they still talk about it like it's some kind of interesting side project." Her observation was both validating and painful. Madison could see what our parents apparently couldn't, that my achievements represented a level of success that dwarfed anything our family had previously experienced. But her recognition also highlighted how alone I had been in dealing with their continued indifference and misunderstanding. "I think they're scared of what they don't understand," I replied. "Dad's world revolves around insurance policies and small-town business relationships. Mom's frame of reference is charity events and garden club meetings. My work might as well be science fiction to them." Madison nodded thoughtfully. "That's probably why Linda wanted you at this brunch tomorrow. She's been talking to everyone about how the Richardson family is full of successful professionals now. I think she wants to show you off as proof of our family's achievements." The idea that I was being invited as a kind of trophy to enhance Linda's presentation of family success was both flattering and insulting. After years of dismissing my career as impractical computer play, Linda apparently now saw value in claiming my accomplishments as part of the family's collective success story. Sunday morning arrived gray and drizzly, with the kind of persistent Connecticut spring weather that makes everything feel slightly melancholy. I dressed carefully for the brunch, choosing a navy blue designer suit that projected professional success without being ostentatious. The outfit had cost more than my parents probably spent on clothing in an entire year, but it looked appropriately conservative for a family gathering at the country club. The Riverside Country Club hadn't changed since my childhood memories of occasional family celebrations there. The same oil paintings of local landscapes hung in the lobby, the same elderly staff members seemed to be managing the dining rooms, and the same atmosphere of understated New England wealth pervaded everything. It was the kind of place where success was measured by membership tenure rather than bank account balances, though the two were obviously correlated. Linda had indeed orchestrated an impressive production. The main dining room had been decorated with elaborate spring flower arrangements, and each place setting included a printed menu featuring what appeared to be specially selected dishes rather than the standard country club buffet. A professional photographer was discreetly positioned near the windows, and Linda herself was dressed as if she were hosting a wedding reception rather than a family meal. The guest list was more extensive than I had anticipated. In addition to our immediate family, Linda had invited various aunts, uncles, and cousins whom I hadn't seen in years, along with several family friends who seemed to serve primarily as audience for whatever presentation Linda had planned. The atmosphere felt more like a corporate event than a casual holiday gathering. I was seated between Uncle George and my cousin Robert, Linda's son, who worked as a marketing manager at a pharmaceutical company in Hartford. Robert had always been friendly, but we had never been particularly close, partly because he was several years younger than me, and partly because our interests had never aligned. He seemed genuinely interested in hearing about my work, though his questions revealed that his understanding of technology was limited to consumer applications. The meal itself was excellent. The country club's kitchen had clearly made special efforts for Linda's event. But the conversation felt strangely artificial, as if everyone was performing their assigned roles in Linda's carefully orchestrated family success narrative. Various relatives shared updates about career promotions, children's achievements, and home renovations, all delivered with the kind of practiced cheerfulness that characterizes forced social interactions. Madison's real estate success was celebrated extensively, with Linda making sure everyone understood the impressive sales numbers and the prestigious clients Madison had been working with. David's recent partnership at his law firm was toasted with champagne. Even Robert's marketing work was presented as evidence of the family's professional accomplishments. Throughout all of this, I noticed that my own career was mentioned only in passing, despite Linda's supposed interest in celebrating my success. When Uncle George tried to bring up Analytica Corp's recent expansion, Linda quickly redirected the conversation to other topics. When the photographer asked to take individual photos of family members who had achieved notable professional success, I was somehow overlooked while Madison and David posed extensively. The pattern was so consistent that it couldn't have been accidental. Linda had invited me not to celebrate my achievements, but to have me present while she celebrated everyone else's more conventional forms of success. My presence served to legitimize her narrative about family accomplishment, while my actual accomplishments were systematically minimized or ignored. The realization was crystallizing when Linda stood to make what she announced would be a special toast to the family's collective success. She had clearly prepared remarks, and she delivered them with the kind of practiced confidence that comes from extensive rehearsal. "I wanted to bring everyone together today because I'm so proud of what our family has achieved," she began, raising her champagne glass while the photographer captured the moment. "When I look around this table, I see doctors and lawyers, successful business owners, real estate professionals, and young people who are building impressive careers in their chosen fields." She continued with specific acknowledgments of various family members' achievements, painting a picture of a family where everyone had found their appropriate place in the professional world. Madison's real estate success was highlighted extensively. David's legal career was praised as an example of dedication and service. Even Robert's marketing work was presented as evidence of the younger generation's commitment to excellence. And of course, Linda continued, her tone shifting slightly, "we have Emma, who moved all the way to Texas to pursue her computer interests. It's wonderful that she's found work that keeps her busy and allows her to support herself independently." The dismissive summary of my career hit me like a physical blow. After building a company worth over $100 million, employing nearly 200 people, and receiving national recognition for technological innovation, I was being described as someone who had found work that kept me busy. The characterization was so reductive and insulting that for a moment I couldn't believe she had actually said it. But Linda wasn't finished. "Emma represents something important about our family values," she continued, clearly warming to her theme. "Even when someone takes an unconventional path, even when they choose careers that the rest of us might not understand, we support them, and we're proud that they're making their own way in the world." The condescension was breathtaking. Linda was using my success as an example of the family's tolerance for failure, presenting my achievements as evidence of their generous acceptance of my limitations rather than recognition of my accomplishments. She was essentially patting herself on the back for being gracious enough to acknowledge the family member who had chosen an inappropriate career path but was trying her best anyway. "Of course, some people are lucky enough to find conventional success," she continued, her eyes moving deliberately around the table to acknowledge the family members whose achievements she actually valued. "Others have to find their own unique ways to contribute. Both paths have value, and both deserve our support and understanding." The false equivalency was the final insult. Linda was creating a hierarchy where conventional achievements like real estate sales and legal partnerships represented real success, while my technology company was presented as an alternative path for people who couldn't manage conventional achievement. She was literally describing my national business recognition as a consolation prize for being unable to succeed in more traditional ways. As she raised her glass for the toast, I felt something inside me snap. The years of dismissal, the constant minimization of my achievements, and now this public humiliation disguised as family celebration became unbearable. I had spent 4 years building something extraordinary, and I had flown back to Connecticut hoping for some form of family acknowledgement. Instead, I was being presented as the family charity case, whose unconventional choices were being tolerated rather than celebrated. The moment had arrived for me to make a choice. I could sit quietly, accept Linda's characterization, and maintain the family piece by allowing her to use my presence to validate her narrative about generous family support for different kinds of success. Or I could respond in a way that would make my actual achievements impossible to ignore or minimize. I looked around the table at the faces of people who had known me my entire life, but had never bothered to understand what I had actually accomplished. Uncle George caught my eye and gave me an encouraging nod, as if he could sense what I was thinking. Madison looked uncomfortable, probably recognizing that Linda's toast had crossed a line from celebration into condescension. My phone buzzed with a text message that would provide the perfect opportunity for the response Linda's toast deserved. The message was from my assistant in Austin. Private jet confirmed for pickup at 2:30 p.m. at Millbrook Regional. Flight plan. Filed for St. Simon's Island. Will you need ground transportation to the island dock? I checked my watch. It was 2:15 p.m. In 15 minutes, my Gulfstream G650 would be landing at the small airport just outside town to take me to the private island I had purchased 6 months earlier as a retreat from the demands of running an international company. The timing was perfect for the kind of dramatic gesture that would make Linda's condescending toast impossible to forget. I stood up slowly, my chair making a soft scraping sound against the country club's polished hardwood floor. The conversations around the table gradually quieted as people noticed my movement, their attention shifting from Linda's toast to my unexpected response. Linda herself looked surprised, clearly not anticipating that her carefully orchestrated celebration would be interrupted by the very person she had just finished patronizing. "Thank you, Aunt Linda, for that incredibly revealing toast," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the suddenly silent dining room. "I think it's important that everyone here understands exactly what kind of computer work I've been doing in Texas, since there seems to be some confusion about the nature of my career." I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone, holding it up so everyone could see the screen. "I just received a text from my assistant confirming that my private jet will be landing in about 10 minutes to take me to my island. But before I leave this delightful family gathering, I think there are a few things you should all know about my little technology hobby." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the country club staff seemed to have paused their activities to listen. Linda's face had gone pale, and I could see her mentally scrambling to understand what was happening to her carefully planned narrative. Analytica Core, the company I founded 4 years ago with $8,000 and a laptop, currently employs 237 people across offices in Austin, New York, London, and Singapore, I continued, my voice steady and professional. Last year, we generated $96 million in revenue serving over 800 clients in 15 countries. This year, we're projected to exceed $150 million. I could hear sharp intakes of breath around the table. Several family members exchanged glances, clearly trying to process numbers that were far beyond anything they had imagined. Uncle George was smiling broadly, apparently delighted that the full scope of my success was finally being revealed. Madison looked stunned but proud, while her husband David was staring at me with the kind of expression lawyers get when they realize they've completely misunderstood a case. The technology platform we developed has revolutionized how major Corporations analyze market trends and consumer behavior, I continued. Our clients include Fortune 100 companies, international banks, and government agencies. We've been featured on the cover of Forbes, TechCrunch, and the Wall Street Journal. 6 months ago, I was named Entrepreneur of the Year by the Austin Chamber of Commerce, competing against CEOs who have built companies worth billions of dollars. Linda was now visibly shaking, her champagne glass trembling in her hand. The photographer she had hired was discreetly taking pictures, apparently recognizing that he was witnessing something more dramatic than the standard family celebration he had been hired to document. As for my personal situation, I said, allowing a slight smile to cross my face, my equity stake in Analytica Core is currently valued at approximately $42 million. That's based on our most recent funding round, led by Meridian Ventures, which valued the company at $160 million. We're currently in discussions with Microsoft, Google, and Amazon about potential acquisitions that could value the company at over $1 billion. The numbers hung in the air like physical objects. I could see people doing mental calculations, trying to comprehend wealth that exceeded anything anyone in our family had ever imagined. Robert, Linda's son, was staring at me open-mouthed. Several of the older relatives were whispering to each other, clearly struggling to reconcile my success with their mental image of me as the awkward computer girl who couldn't fit into conventional family expectations. The island I mentioned is a 300-acre private retreat off the coast of Georgia that I purchased last year for $12 million, I continued, checking my watch. It includes a main residence, guest houses, a private marina, and a helicopter landing pad. I bought it because running an international technology company can be stressful, and I needed a place where I could completely disconnect from business pressures. I turned to address Linda directly, my voice taking on a sharper edge. So when you describe my career as computer interests and suggest that I've found unconventional ways to contribute, I want to make sure everyone understands what you're actually saying. You're diminishing achievements that have created more wealth, more jobs, and more economic impact than everyone else at this table combined. You're treating national business recognition as a consolation prize for being unable to succeed conventionally. Linda opened her mouth as if to respond, but no words came out. Her carefully constructed narrative about family success had just been demolished by information that made everyone else's achievements seem modest by comparison. The woman who had spent years positioning herself as the family's authority on success was suddenly revealed as someone who couldn't recognize extraordinary achievement when it was sitting at her own dinner table. The really interesting thing, I continued, is that you invited me here supposedly to celebrate family success, but you've spent the entire meal systematically ignoring or minimizing the most successful business venture anyone in our family has ever created. Madison sells beautiful houses to wealthy families, which is admirable and important work. David helps clients navigate legal challenges, which serves a vital social function. Robert develops marketing strategies for pharmaceutical products, which contributes to public health. All of these are valuable careers that deserve respect and recognition. I paused to let that acknowledgement sink in before delivering the crucial point. But none of these careers have created hundreds of jobs, generated tens of millions in tax revenue, or built technology platforms that are changing how major industries operate. None of these achievements have attracted investment from the world's most sophisticated venture capital firms or acquisition interest from the largest technology companies on Earth. The silence was becoming uncomfortable, but I wasn't finished. Years of dismissed achievements and condescending family dynamics had led to this moment, and I was going to make sure my point was completely clear. What's particularly fascinating is how you've chosen to interpret my success, I said, still looking directly at Linda. Instead of recognizing that someone from our family has built something extraordinary, you've decided to frame it as evidence of your own generosity in tolerating unconventional choices. You've turned my achievement into a story about your own magnanimous character, rather than acknowledging what was actually accomplished. Linda finally found her voice. though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "Emma, I didn't mean to. I mean, we all knew you were doing well, but we didn't realize." "You didn't realize because you never bothered to ask," I interrupted. "For 4 years, I've been building something remarkable, and not once has anyone in this family shown genuine interest in understanding what I was actually doing. When I mentioned million-dollar contracts, you changed the subject to Madison's real estate awards. When I talked about international expansion, you redirected the conversation to Cousin Sophia's wedding plans. When I tried to share professional recognition, you treated it as equivalent to local Chamber of Commerce honors." I could see Mom and Dad exchanging uncomfortable glances. They were beginning to understand that their dismissive attitude toward my career hadn't just been misguided, it had been spectacularly wrong in ways that reflected poorly on their judgment and their values. My phone buzzed with another text from my assistant. "Jet touching down now. Ground crew ready for immediate departure. Captain Martinez estimates 10 minutes for final preparations." I showed the screen to the table, allowing everyone to see the message and the professional aviation terminology that indicated this wasn't some elaborate bluff. "As you can see, my aircraft is landing at Millbrook Regional as we speak," I said, my tone becoming more businesslike. "Captain Martinez is an experienced pilot who previously flew for NetJets before I hired him full-time. The Gulfstream G650 seats up to 14 passengers and has a range of 7,000 nautical miles, which allows me to fly directly from Austin to London or Singapore without refueling stops." The casual mention of a full-time pilot and intercontinental range was deliberately calculated to emphasize the scale of wealth I was operating with. These weren't the kind of details someone could fabricate convincingly, and several family members were clearly beginning to understand that everything I was telling them was not only true, but represented a level of success that dwarfed their collective achievements. "I need to leave shortly because I have a scheduled conference call at 4 o'clock with the managing directors of 3 different private equity firms who are interested in participating in our Series B funding round," I continued. "We're considering raising an additional $50 million to accelerate our expansion into Asia-Pacific markets, and these firms represent over $2 billion in combined assets under management." Uncle George stood up as I prepared to continue, his eyes bright with unmistakable pride. "Emma, before you say another word, I want everyone at this table to understand something," he said, his voice carrying the authority that comes from decades of business experience. "What Emma has accomplished isn't just impressive, it's extraordinary by any reasonable standard. Building a company from nothing to nearly $100 million in annual revenue requires a combination of technical brilliance, business acumen, and personal determination that very few people possess." He turned to address Linda directly, his tone respectful but firm. "Linda, I've known Emma since she was a child, and I've watched her develop capabilities that most adults never acquire. When she was 12 years old, she took a broken computer that I couldn't repair and made it run better than new. By the time she was in high school, she was building websites and software applications that professional developers couldn't match. What she's achieved in Austin represents the natural evolution of talents that were evident decades ago to anyone who bothered to pay attention." Uncle George's intervention provided the perfect setup for what I needed to say next. His credibility as a successful business owner and his long-standing relationship with our family meant that his assessment of my achievements couldn't be dismissed as biased or uninformed. "Uncle George is absolutely right about the foundation for what I've built," I said. "But what he's too modest to mention is that he was the only person in this family who recognized and encouraged those early capabilities. While everyone else was dismissing my interest in technology as antisocial behavior, George was providing me with equipment, guidance, and most importantly, the confidence to believe that my unconventional skills could lead to something meaningful." I looked around the table, making eye contact with each family member as I continued. "The irony of today's celebration is that you're all here to acknowledge family success, but you've spent years overlooking the most significant success story, any of us has ever been part of. Not because you couldn't see the potential, because you chose to define success in ways that excluded what I was building. Linda was now visibly struggling to maintain her composure. The woman who had orchestrated today's event to showcase her position as the family's social leader was confronting the reality that she had fundamentally misjudged the most successful person in the room. Her carefully constructed narrative about family achievement had been revealed as superficial and exclusionary. "Emma, please," she said, her voice carrying a pleading tone I had never heard from her before. "I think we've all made mistakes in understanding what you were accomplishing. Can't we put this behind us and celebrate your success properly?" Her attempt at damage control was transparent and unsatisfying. Linda was trying to rewrite history in real time, transforming years of condescension into innocent misunderstanding that could be quickly corrected with appropriate acknowledgement. "Linda, the problem isn't that you misunderstood what I was doing," I replied calmly. "The problem is that you never tried to understand it. When I started Analytica Core, I called Mom and Dad to tell them about the company launch and the first major contracts we had signed. Dad's response was to ask when I was going to get a real job with benefits and a steady paycheck. When I mentioned that we were hiring our first employees, Mom suggested that I should consider moving back to Connecticut and finding work at one of the local insurance companies. I could see my parents shifting uncomfortably in their seats, probably recognizing the conversations I was referencing and understanding for the first time how dismissive their responses had been. When Analytica Core was featured in Austin Business Journal as one of the city's fastest-growing technology companies, I sent the article to the entire family. I continued. "Linda, your response was to send me a clipping about Madison's real estate award and a suggestion that I should think about getting married before I got too focused on my career. You literally responded to national business recognition by suggesting that my priorities were misplaced. The specific examples were having their intended effect. Instead of allowing the family to treat years of dismissive behavior as innocent misunderstanding, I was documenting a pattern of deliberate indifference that couldn't be explained away as mere confusion." My phone buzzed again with an update from my pilot. "Aircraft ready for departure. Weather conditions optimal for flight to St. Simon's Island. Estimated flight time 2 hours 12 minutes. I held up the phone so everyone could see the professional aviation communication format. "Captain Martinez is confirming our departure clearance," I said, then looked directly at Linda. "The aircraft you're seeing messages about is a $65 million business jet that I purchased 8 months ago to manage the travel requirements of running an international company. It's not leased, it's not borrowed, and it's not a shared ownership arrangement. I own it outright, along with a full-time crew and a hangar at Austin Bergstrom International Airport. The specificity was important because it eliminated any possibility that I was exaggerating or misrepresenting my circumstances. These were verifiable facts that could be researched by anyone who doubted their accuracy, and the aviation terminology in my pilot's messages provided independent confirmation of the aircraft's existence and availability. The island where I'm heading is similarly unambiguous," I continued. "St. Catherine's Island is a private 300-acre retreat that I purchased last year after 18 months of negotiations with the previous owner. The transaction was covered in the Wall Street Journal's real estate section because private island sales of that magnitude are considered newsworthy. The property includes a 10,000-square-foot main residence, 4 guest houses, a private marina capable of accommodating yachts up to 120 feet, and a helicopter landing pad that allows direct access from the mainland." I stood up fully, preparing to leave, but wanting to make one final point that would frame everything I had revealed in its proper context. "I want to be absolutely clear about why I'm sharing these details," I said, addressing the entire table. "It's not because I need validation from this family, or because I'm trying to prove that your dismissive treatment was hurtful. I'm sharing this information because Linda's toast this afternoon perfectly encapsulated an attitude that has characterized this family's response to my career for 4 years, and I want everyone to understand exactly what that attitude has been. Dismissing. I picked up my purse and checked my watch, noting that I had about 5 minutes to reach the airport for my scheduled departure. When Linda describes my career as computer interests and frames my success as evidence of family tolerance for unconventional choices, she's revealing something important about how this family processes achievement that doesn't fit predetermined categories. You've been so committed to conventional definitions of success that you literally couldn't recognize extraordinary achievement when it was happening right in front of you. Madison finally found her voice, standing up and moving toward me with an expression that mixed admiration with regret. "Emma, I owe you a sincere apology," she said, her voice carrying genuine emotion. "I've been following your company's progress online for the past year, and I've been amazed by what you've accomplished. I should have spoken up today when Linda was characterizing your career so dismissively. I should have spoken up years ago when our parents were treating your ambitions as unrealistic fantasies." Her acknowledgement was more meaningful than I had expected. Madison had always been caught between her own success and the family dynamics. That favored conventional achievement, but she had never actively participated in dismissing my career. Her apology suggested that she understood not just the magnitude of what I had achieved, but also the family context that had made my success more difficult than it needed to be. "Madison, you don't owe me an apology," I replied. "You've always been supportive in your own way, and you never participated in the kind of active dismissal that characterized other family members' responses. What I needed from this family wasn't defense against criticism. It was genuine interest in understanding what I was trying to build." I turned back to Linda, who was still sitting at the head of the table looking stunned and increasingly isolated, as other family members began to distance themselves from her earlier characterizations of my career. "Linda, I want you to understand something that might help you process what happened here today," I said, my tone becoming more reflective than confrontational. "The problem with your toast wasn't that it was intentionally cruel or deliberately hurtful. The problem was that it revealed how completely you had failed to understand someone you've known for nearly 3 decades. Your characterization of my career as computer interests demonstrated that you had never bothered to learn what I actually do for work, despite years of opportunities to ask meaningful questions." I could see her beginning to understand the deeper implications of what I was saying. This wasn't just about one inappropriate toast or one misguided family gathering. It was about a pattern of intellectual incuriosity and social prejudice that had prevented her from recognizing extraordinary achievement within her own extended family. "The really tragic part," I continued, "is that if you had been genuinely interested in my work, you could have been legitimately proud instead of offering patronizing tolerance. You could have celebrated actual achievement instead of inventing fictional narratives about family generosity. But you were so invested in conventional definitions of success that you couldn't recognize unconventional success, even when it exceeded conventional achievement by orders of magnitude." My phone buzzed with a call from Captain Martinez. I answered it on speaker so everyone could hear the professional aviation communication. "Ms. Richardson, we're ready for immediate departure," came the pilot's voice through the phone's speaker. "Air traffic control has cleared us for takeoff at your convenience. The flight plan to St. Simon's Island has been filed and approved. We should arrive at approximately 4:45 p.m. Eastern Time." "Thank you, Captain Martinez. I'm leaving the country club now and should arrive at the airport in approximately 7 minutes," I replied, then ended the call and looked around the table one final time. That was Captain Rodriguez Martinez, who has been flying corporate aircraft for 15 years and joined my full-time crew 8 months ago, I explained. "The professional protocols you just heard are standard for private aviation operations, and they represent the kind of logistical complexity that comes with managing international business operations." I moved toward the door, then paused to address one final aspect of the day's revelations that I thought might be educational for my family. "Before I leave, I want to share one more piece of information that might help everyone understand the scale of what we're discussing, I said. The annual operating costs for the aircraft, the island, and my other business assets exceed $3 million per year. That's more than most people earn in their entire careers, and it represents only the operational expenses for assets that are already paid for. The underlying capital investment in these assets exceeds $80 million. The numbers were having their intended effect. Several family members were clearly struggling to process wealth that exceeded anything in their reference frame, while others were beginning to understand that my success represented a fundamentally different category of achievement than anything they had previously encountered. Uncle George approached me as I prepared to leave, his expression mixing pride with concern. "Emma, I'm incredibly proud of what you've accomplished, and I think today's conversation was long overdue," he said quietly. "But I also hope you'll be open to rebuilding relationships with family members who are ready to acknowledge their mistakes and learn from them." His perspective was characteristically thoughtful and generous. Uncle George had always been the family peacemaker, someone who could see multiple sides of complicated situations and find paths toward reconciliation. His suggestion wasn't naive. He understood that meaningful relationships required acknowledgement of past mistakes and commitment to different behavior going forward. "George, I appreciate that sentiment, and I'm certainly open to relationships that are based on mutual respect and genuine understanding," I replied. "But those relationships will need to be built on completely different foundations than what existed before today. I'm not interested in returning to family dynamics where my achievements are minimized or dismissed, regardless of how well-intentioned the dismissal might be." As I walked through the country club lobby toward the exit, I could hear the buzz of intense conversation resuming behind me. The carefully orchestrated family celebration had been transformed into something very different. A moment of reckoning where long-held assumptions about success, family, and recognition had been challenged and overturned. The drive to Millbrook Regional Airport took 12 minutes through the familiar countryside of my childhood. The landscape was undeniably beautiful. Rolling hills covered with early spring vegetation, colonial houses with perfectly maintained gardens, and the general atmosphere of prosperous New England tranquility that had shaped my earliest memories. But as beautiful as the scenery was, it represented a world that had been too small to contain my ambitions or recognize my potential. The same social structures that created such an appealing sense of community and tradition had also created rigid expectations about appropriate career paths and conventional definitions of success. My Gulfstream G650 was waiting on the tarmac with its engines already spooled up for immediate departure. The aircraft represented more than just convenient transportation. It was a symbol of the freedom that comes from building something significant, with your own vision and effort. I had purchased the jet not as a status symbol, but as a practical tool that allowed me to manage an international company while maintaining the flexibility to work from anywhere in the world. Captain Martinez greeted me at the aircraft stairs with the kind of professional courtesy that characterizes high-end aviation services. "Good afternoon, Ms. Richardson. We're cleared for immediate departure to St. Simon's Island. Flight time will be approximately 2 hours and 12 minutes. The weather forecast shows clear skies and light winds for the entire route." "Excellent. Captain Martinez, I have an important conference call at 4 o'clock that should last about 90 minutes. So please ensure we have optimal connectivity throughout the flight," I replied, settling into the leather seat that served as my office. At 37,000 feet, as the jet taxied toward the runway, I looked out the window at the Connecticut landscape that had shaped my childhood and adolescence. The rolling hills and colonial architecture were undeniably beautiful, but they represented a world that had failed to recognize or nurture the potential that had ultimately created extraordinary value and achievement. The takeoff was smooth and powerful, lifting me away from family obligations and expectations toward a life that I had designed entirely according to my own vision. As we climbed through the clouds, I reflected on how the day's events had provided a kind of closure that I hadn't realized I needed. For years, I had carried some lingering doubt about whether my family's dismissive attitude toward my career might have been based on legitimate concerns that I was too proud to acknowledge. Perhaps they had seen something I had missed, some fundamental flaw in my approach or unrealistic aspect of my ambitions. The success of Analytica Core had largely resolved those doubts, but there had remained a small voice wondering whether I had been unfair in my assessment of their reactions. Today had eliminated any remaining uncertainty. Linda's toast had demonstrated beyond question that my family's attitude toward my achievements was based on narrow-mindedness and an inability to recognize value outside conventional categories. Their failure to understand or appreciate what I had built reflected their limitations, not mine. The conference call with Meridian Ventures and our potential Series B investors went exceptionally well. We discussed market expansion strategies, competitive positioning, and revenue projections for the next 3 years. The conversation was conducted at levels of sophistication and complexity that would have been incomprehensible to the family. Members who had just described my career as computer interests. David Kim from Meridian Ventures was particularly enthusiastic about our growth trajectory. "Emma, the metrics you're showing us represent the kind of scalable business model that defines category-leading companies," he said during the call. "Your customer retention rates, expansion revenue, and international growth patterns are consistent with companies that become dominant forces in their industries." The other investors on the call expressed similar enthusiasm, and by the end of our conversation, we had preliminary commitments for a Series B round that would value Analytica Core at over $400 million. The funding would accelerate our expansion into Asia-Pacific markets and provide the capital for strategic acquisitions that could establish us as the global leader in predictive analytics. As we approached St. Simon's Island, I could see my private retreat coming into view. 300 acres of pristine coastline with the main house positioned to take advantage of both sunrise and sunset views over the Atlantic Ocean. The island represented more than just luxury. It was a sanctuary where I could think strategically about the future without the distractions and pressures of corporate life. The helicopter transfer from the island's airstrip to the main house took only 5 minutes, but the journey felt symbolic. I was moving from the world of family obligations and social expectations to a place that existed entirely according to my own preferences and priorities. Every decision about the island's development had been mine alone, from the architectural style of the buildings to the selection of native plants for the landscaping. That evening, as I sat on the terrace overlooking the ocean with a glass of wine from my private collection, I felt a profound sense of peace that had nothing to do with the luxury surroundings. The satisfaction came from knowing that I had succeeded, on my own terms, built something meaningful and valuable, and proven that unconventional paths could lead to extraordinary destinations. My phone began buzzing with messages from family members who were apparently still processing the day's revelations. The first was from Madison. "Emma, I've been thinking about our conversation today, and I wanted you to know how genuinely impressed I am by what you've accomplished. I also wanted to apologize for not recognizing sooner how extraordinary your success has been. Would you be interested in having dinner the next time you're in Connecticut? I'd love to hear more about your work and your life in Austin." Her message was followed by another from Uncle George. "Emma, today was a long time coming, and I'm proud of how you handled that situation. More importantly, I'm proud of what you've built and the person you've become. You've proven that believing in yourself and following your vision can lead to achievements that exceed everyone's expectations. Thank you for showing our family what's possible when someone has the courage to pursue their own path." Even Mom had sent a message, though hers was more tentative. "Emma, your father and I have been talking since you left, and we realize we need to have a serious conversation about how we've understood your career. We're both very proud of your success, and we'd like to learn more about your company and your plans for the future. Could we schedule a time to talk when you're not too busy with your business responsibilities? The messages suggested that the day's revelations had prompted some genuine reflection among family members who were finally beginning to understand the magnitude of what they had dismissed. While I appreciated their newfound recognition, I also knew that these relationships would need to be rebuilt on entirely different foundations. The most surprising message came from Linda, sent several hours after I had left the country club. Emma, I owe you a sincere and comprehensive apology for how I characterized your career today and for my attitude over the past several years. I realize now that I completely failed to understand what you were building, and my comments were not only inappropriate, but deeply unfair to achievements that deserve recognition and celebration. I would be honored if you would give me the opportunity to learn more about your work and to acknowledge your success properly. I understand if you're not interested in maintaining a relationship after today, but I hope you'll consider giving me a chance to do better in the future. Her apology was more thoughtful and comprehensive than I had expected. Linda had built her identity around being the family's authority on success and social appropriateness, so acknowledging such a fundamental error in judgment must have been difficult for her. While I wasn't ready to forget years of condescending treatment, her message suggested that she was capable of genuine reflection and growth. As the sun set over the Atlantic, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. 4 years earlier, I had left Connecticut feeling rejected and misunderstood, carrying only my determination and a belief that I could build something valuable with my technical skills. Tonight, I was sitting on my own private island, having built a company that employed hundreds of people and had revolutionized how major corporations approached data analysis. The success felt complete not because of the wealth or recognition it had brought, but because it represented the full realization of potential that had been dismissed by people who should have been supportive. I had proven to myself and to the world that unconventional paths could lead to extraordinary destinations, that technical skills could create massive value, and that believing in your own vision was more important than seeking approval from others. Tomorrow, I would return to Austin to continue building Analytica Core toward whatever came next. Perhaps the Series B funding round that would accelerate our international expansion. Perhaps strategic acquisitions that would establish us as the dominant force in enterprise analytics, or perhaps an eventual IPO that would create generational wealth for our employees and investors. Whatever direction we chose, it would be based on strategic considerations and market opportunities, rather than family expectations or social conventions. The girl who had once felt invisible in her own family had become a woman who was recognized as one of the most innovative entrepreneurs in American technology. The computer skills that had been dismissed as antisocial hobbies had generated more economic value than anyone in my family's history. As I prepared for bed in the master suite of my island retreat, with the sound of waves providing a natural soundtrack and the lights of distant ships creating a peaceful glow on the horizon, I felt grateful for every rejection and dismissal that had forced me to become completely self-reliant. My family's failure to recognize my potential had been their loss, but it had been my liberation. The private jet would take me back to Austin tomorrow, where I would continue building something extraordinary with people who understood and valued innovation. But tonight, I was exactly where I belonged, in a place I had created through my own vision and effort, surrounded by the peace that comes from knowing you've proven every doubt wrong and exceeded every expectation, including your own. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.